A breaking development to bring you from the last few moments. The Kremlin says Russia will cease all hostilities from the evening of the 19th until the 21st of April. In a statement, it said it assumes the Ukrainian side to, quote, follow its example, adding Ukraine's actions during the ceasefire will show Kyiv's readiness for a peaceful settlement. President Vladimir Putin said Russian troops, meanwhile, must remain ready to repeal possible violations of the truce by Ukraine, and that instructions have been given to commanders in the special military operations zone regarding the ceasefire. Our international affairs commentator Doug Herbert joins me now on set. Doug, what do we make of this surprise announcement?
It's the hallmark of a Russian propaganda operation, a Kremlin propaganda operation. It's cynical. It's a truce that is anything but a truce, couched in the language of humanitarian considerations at a time when Russia continues to launch wave after wave of furious exploding drone attacks across Ukraine, when in recent days and weeks it has launched some of its most ferocious attacks on civilian infrastructure while claiming it was doing nothing of the sort. In cities across Ukraine, the most perhaps notable of which was Sumy very recently, a tragic incident there. With civilians killed in the middle of Palm Sunday, going about their business. Look, what we have here is basically Putin doing a classic, a trick from the Putin playbook. We've seen it in the past. He sets himself up as the good student, the peacemaker, shifting the onus, of course, to the big bad Volodymyr Zelensky, ball in his court now to show that he can be the big man that Putin is and step up to the plate in the name of making peace as well. And obviously, Putin knowing how to perfectly play Donald Trump at a time when Donald Trump's White House has been blowing hot and cold with Ukraine, showing growing impatience, insinuating perhaps that it wants to wash its hands of the whole thing and perhaps focus on other priorities. So Putin, obviously, he does want to stay on side with the U.S. He does want to still have Donald Trump and the U.S. as close allies, as he has up until now, in Russia's bid to sort of end its pariah status, to have sanctions against it lifted, if not to get back on the world's good side, at least to establish once again a relationship with still the world's leading economic power, which allows Russia to thrive once again economically. He knows it has a golden opportunity in Donald Trump. Vladimir Putin, from a cynical PR standpoint, knows how to play this game absolutely perfectly. What's really interesting here is even as he announced this 30-hour ceasefire, and let's remember, 30-hour Easter ceasefire, far shorter period than the 30-day ceasefire Ukraine agreed to after its talks with the U.S. Last month in March. But put that aside for a moment. What you have right now is a situation, even in announcing the ceasefire, Russia ordered its commanders in the field to be prepared to retaliate for potential Ukrainian violations of the truce. So a very short window announced for this truce. It takes effect practically immediately. You have very little time to respond to anything. And it puts, Ukraine, like I said, it gives the illusion of putting the ball back in Ukraine's court. Clearly, the ball's in Moscow's court right now, because Moscow's the one that has continued to press through with this war against Ukraine in more and more, you might argue, ferocious forms, targeting all sorts of infrastructures. And yet, the rhetoric out of the Kremlin makes it seem like it's anything but. Moscow accusing in the past 24 hours Ukraine of violating, of striking energy infrastructure more than 100 times since the two sides first spoke and sat down with the United States. So once again, the basic model, a cynical gesture, it's Kremlin propaganda, the master of Kremlin propaganda, sort of pulling another trick from his sleeve to try to set himself up as a peacemaker at a time when Russia, by its actions, its demonstrable actions on the battlefield, has been showing itself as anything but right now in a peacemaking posture. Just the contrary, driving through on its offensive. It's perhaps no coincidence that today also Russia said that it is basically ejected the Ukrainians, all but totally ejected them from their foothold in the Kursk region of southern Russia, saying that they control effectively now about 99.5% of the territory of the Kursk region. Significant because you'll remember last August, the Ukrainians made what was an audacious incursion into Kursk. The Russians have been fighting tooth and nail to drive them out ever since. It was a humiliating setback for Russia, even if the Kremlin never depicted it as such. And Russia has been fighting ferociously ever since to try to claw back that territory. So once again, the big takeaway, Jenny, from this is a cynical PR operation by Putin of a kind we have seen on repeated occasions in the past. This ceasefire is about, I trust it as far as I can throw it right now. And once again, the onus is once again put by the Kremlin on Zelensky to prove that he can follow suit, can step up and do what good Putin has done by trying to take the step towards peace. But we know where things actually lie right now. You just need to look at the battlefield. You need to look at the reality of what's going on.
And could we see this 30-hour truce then translating into a longer truce?
Well, you say, could we, right? So that leaves open, obviously, a little crack of yeah, it could lead to a longer truce, but I wouldn't put my safe money on that if I were a gambling man. I would say, no, it won't. I suspect that there will at some point be a Russian accusation of some sort of Ukrainian violation. Remember, it's not important what the actual facts of the battlefield situation are. All that's important in this scenario is what the Kremlin says is happening on the ground. If the Kremlin says Ukraine has violated the truce, then by definition, the Kremlin's definition, Ukraine has violated the truce, and all bets are off. It can do. Kremlin will be justified in pursuing its goals. The bottom line here is the reason I am perhaps skeptical, to put it mildly, about the chances of this leading to something more long-lasting is the timing over Easter. It's a cynical opportunity to use the religious holiday of peace to try to, put himself in the posture of the peacemaker. But I also feel like his basic demands have never, ever been dropped. He has never backed down on those basic demands, which are ultimately he'd like to see Zelensky out of power. Ultimately, he wants Russia and needs Russia to keep control of the territories he's illegally annexed in the south and east of Ukraine. And ultimately, he'd also like NATO to leave the eastern parts of Europe.
All right. Thank you very much for that, Doug. We're going to cross to Washington now to speak to our correspondent, Fraser Jackson, who's standing by. So, Fraser, from Washington's point of view, could this be seen as a sign then that the pressure is working?
Well, I think it's important to kind of come off the back of what Doug's saying with the words that Donald Trump said just 24 hours ago inside the Oval Office. He was asked about what it would take because, of course, just previously to that, Marco Rubio had said that the United States might walk away from any kind of ceasefire deal if it didn't get implemented quickly. Well, this could be then a play from Vladimir Putin to, as Doug said, make it appear as though Russia is doing the groundwork that the Americans want. Because Donald Trump said, if for some reason one of the two parties makes it very difficult, we're just going to say, you're foolish, you're fools, you're horrible people, and we're going to just take a pass on those diplomatic efforts. Now, we asked the president about how long he was giving the Ukrainians and the Russians to come to the table, and Donald Trump said there's no specific number of days, but he wants it happening quickly. Now, he was also asked whether Putin was stalling, and Donald Trump said, I hope not, but I'll let you know about that soon. And he added, nobody's playing me, I'm trying to help. I know when people are playing us, I have to see an enthusiasm to want to end it. I think I see it from both sides. So Donald Trump then potentially, this could have been a play by Vladimir Putin to make it appear to the United States that Russia was wanting to get to a ceasefire agreement, even if the reality on the ground says otherwise. We've just heard from Volodymyr Zelensky in the last few moments on Twitter saying that Russian drones were still being repelled, and that shows the true Vladimir Putin's true attitude towards Easter and human life. So again, the war of information continues between both sides, but the United States here is trying to play the peacemaker, and of course one of the main things that the Ukrainians believe will keep the United States interested in Ukraine is that minerals deal, which the US signed a memorandum or intent to sign that deal just a few days ago, and the deal is meant to be thrashed out in the next coming week and then eventually being signed either on next Saturday or in the coming days after that. And the Ukrainians hope that that will keep the US interested long enough in Ukraine to help rebuild the country and to basically stop this war from happening in the sense that if the US have vested interest in the country, they'll be less likely to want the Russians to continue these kind of attacks. But there are no security guarantees that we know of included in this deal. So whether the US pressure campaign on both sides is working to get to a longer ceasefire still remains to be seen. And I've asked the White House about that this morning. So far, we've had no reaction from the White House on this Easter ceasefire. But I agree with Doug. It's unlikely that we'll see this ceasefire deal continuing beyond the end of Sunday.
Fraser, thank you for that. We're going to cross now to Kyiv to speak to our correspondent Emmanuelle Chaze. Emmanuelle, Fraser just touched up on the reaction from President Volodymyr Zelensky earlier, but tell us the reaction we've heard from Zelensky and how Putin's declaration is being received in Kyiv.
Well, I would like to point out that I am here on Sofia Square in the center of Kyiv, Kyiv which is currently under Russian kamikaze drones attacks, so not here in the city center, but in the suburbs of the city. Air defense is working. This is what Volodymyr Zelensky was referring to, and you can see this contrast. We are here on an Easter weekend where you have people who are ready to celebrate Easter. This is a big holiday here. You see people behind me. They are here sightseeing, a bit unaware, if you will, of the danger that is only a few kilometers away. And we are 1 hour ahead from Paris time here, so it's already past 6 p.m. So we should already see the effects of that truce declared by Vladimir Putin. Only here in Ukraine we are still under Russian drones attacks. So the reaction here in Ukraine is one of habit. There's a habit of hearing such declarations from the Kremlin. Remember, in January, or rather in December 22, January 23, the Kremlin had said it would it would observe Christmas truce. This hadn't happened. The entire city was under a series of large-scale missile and drones attack, and right now, only a few hours after this declaration from Vladimir Putin, we see again Ukraine being attacked. So there's a little credit given to the words of the Russian president seen from Kyiv.
And this announcement comes, as Ukraine warns that Russia has already begun its springtime offensive.
Absolutely. Commander-in-Chief General Syrskyi had announced that Russia had already indeed begun its offensive. We've seen some movements of Russian troops which are, for example, performing advances in the Kursk region where Ukrainian troops still hold some of the territory it had begun to control during its offensive last August. It has lost a lot of this territory that Kyiv intended to exchange against illegally occupied Ukrainian territory here, but Ukrainian troops are still present there. We've also seen Russian troops trying to realize advances, to operate advances in the Zaporizhia region as part of this renewed offensive, as well as more attacks, assaults on the eastern front line.
Yeah, Jenny, it's very instructive what we're hearing from Emmanuelle there in Kyiv. I just think, just for the context here, it's important, back in 2023, there's an Eastern Orthodox Christmas celebrated in Russia in early January. And on January 5th of 2023, so we're going back over 2 years, the head of the Russian Orthodox Church, Patriarch Kirill II, he basically called for a truce. For both, as he said, both sides of this conflict, called for a truce, and subsequently, right after that, responding to the Orthodox Patriarch's call for a truce, Vladimir Putin, back then, January 2023, basically called for a 36-hour truce, a little longer than the one right now that he called for. That truce was rejected at the time by the Ukrainian authorities because they deemed it a cynical stratagem. They called it a trap, basically. And the rest is literally history and tragic war history. The fighting persisted. It continued. So it really does resonate 2 years later. We've seen this before. When I say we've seen this pattern before, we really have seen it before. The Russians posing as peacemakers of goodwill and trying to sort of switch the tables, switch the chairs there, and make it look like the onus is on the Ukrainians, the big bad Ukrainians who are the aggressors in this war, to step up to the plate and do what we Russians have been good enough to do, which is to call for a truce. If they really want peace as much as we Russians do, then they will follow suit and follow through with this. We're seeing the same playbook right now being used again by Vladimir Putin.
All right, thank you very much indeed for that, Doug. We'll, of course, be keeping a very close eye on that in the hours to come.